that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine. Hello everybody, I need a weapon, and welcome back to the Halo Expanded Universe. Today I have for you a book that was written a bit later. This is not during the original trilogy of video games. This was actually written long into the 343 era, but it takes place chronologically around here, which is Halo Silent Storm by Troy Denning. Now chronologically, this takes place about a year after Contact Harvest. And so there's some context we're missing, because of course the Fall of Reach is the big, like, backstory book to everything. You know, we learn about the Spartans, about the Covenant, da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, I talked about the comic a little bit earlier, so there's some vague notion you should have about what that's all about by going to that. But here, they've only been fighting the Covenant for a year. They don't really know that much about them. They're aliens. You know, like, maybe they'll fight this way because that's what humans do, but maybe they won't. They're not us. They're a completely different species. You know, they're a whole different breed of things that we don't know what they're going to do. And so part of this book is figuring out how they operate and how to stop them. Now, of course, we got John 117 and his whole blue team, which you meet in the Fall of Reach, and a couple other Spartan teams. Some being characters we'll meet in later books, like Last Light, which is another book by Troy Denning. And whatnot. A lot of minor characters in this book are characters that, you know, you won't see in the original trilogy, will show up in other Denning books. So, it's really good. I like it. You know, it's the whole idea is like, let's get these Spartans onto these Covenant ships. Let's capture Covenant ships so we can learn what they're capable of, what they can do, and how we can better stop them. In between that, you also have some really good character moments for John 117, along with Avery Johnson. He returns, because who better to help teach the Spartans how to defeat the Covenant than someone who's already beat them up as a mostly normal man? Avery Johnson. We also get some cool stuff with Dr. Halls in here. We get some mentions of Preston Cole, who we will hear more about in the Cole Protocol. And yeah, just overall, it's a really fun book. Is it necessary? Do you need this to understand the plot of the games? No. But the Human Covenant War is a really long war. John is 15 in this. By the time we get to the Halo game that we play together, he's like 30. Or close to 30. So that's a long war. So we don't really get to see much of it, though. So with this book, we get a little bit more into that. And, you know, it's, for something that wasn't really necessary, I suppose, it's so good. It's so much better than it has any right to be. And Troy Denning writes this story with stride. Of course, there's a lot of action in it, and when the action happens, my mind goes blur, because I hate action in novels, because I have a really hard time visualizing it, unless you're really good at writing action, which, I mean, I guess it's not a matter of being able to write it well, but it takes a certain type of person to make me actually be able to visualize it. And not too many people have done that for me. Matthew Stover is one of them, and Drew Karpyshyn is another. But outside of that, it's been really hard for me to visualize action scenes. That being said, there's enough character moments in here that it was okay that a lot of it was action. But I want to get into spoilers, but overall, we get to see the Master Chief become the Master Chief in this novel, because he actually doesn't have that rank till the end of this story. So that was actually pretty cool. And yeah, it's a nice little story. Not little, but it's a nice story set before the events of the game. If you wanted more inside the Covenant War, you get it here. We also get to see the first meeting of Avery Johnson and Master Chief, which I think is really good, actually. Because in the novels, they don't interact too much, outside of First Strike, which takes place after Halo 1. And then, of course, for any of you that play the games, you know what happens to Johnson in the third game. So if you wanted more Johnson, this is one of the few places where you can get that. And it's nice to see him here, and it's nice to see that interaction between them and that friendship that they have. So that way, when you get to 3, that might hit a bit harder, because he's just kind of like this awesome, cool dude in the game. So it's cool to get a little bit more with him here. Because of course we had his own novel with Contact Harvest, but he's a little serious in that one. He still, has those serious moments with Master Chief and stuff, but you still get um, a lot of those moments you'd expect from him here. Um, then also Troy Denning does a good balance of recognizing when something is wrong in a setting without making it controversial. Um, when it comes to controversial things in the setting that already existed. For instance, I know there's another trilogy of books in the Halo universe which get a bit critiqued. It's the same thing with the Star Wars expanded universe when we deal with the Republic Commando books, both of which happen to be written by Karen Traviss. Now, I haven't read them yet, so I'll give my fair shake. I'm rather fond of the Republic Commando books, and she's quite preachy in that too. And those are about clone people. But the point is I know that Travis will be a little bit harping on the point that these are child soldiers who grew up, and Troy Denning kind of recognizes it and uses that in his story. Like John even recognizes it, Master Chief. He recognizes, like, yeah, what happened to me was probably wrong, but at the same time, I'm this awesome soldier and I'm able to help humanity, and that's kind of great. So it's a little bit of a balance there, and there's certainly, as that revelation comes to a few people in this book, you get differing perspectives on that, and it's certainly something to be kind of wary of because, yeah, it is something quite morally wrong, but at the same time, it's used for a greater good, even though that wasn't the intention. So you get a lot of that, and I think Troy Denning just handles that as best as you could if you're going to critique it. Um, as opposed to what I hear about Karen Travis's trilogy, which is that she's rather preachy, but that's nothing new if you're a Star Wars fan. So that's pretty much it in terms of non-spoilers. I'm gonna get into spoilers. If you don't want that, get out of here. So the year's 2526. It's 1 year after Harvest. As I mentioned in the non-spoiler, John recognizes he's had wrongs done to him, but he doesn't mind it. He's also only 15 in this novel. And I'm sure this is a reference to The Fall of Reach, but his friend Samuel died a few months back from this story. We also have Blue Team here, which is, of course, John's team from Fall of Reach. We also have Gold Team and Green Team. So all in total, they got like 12 Spartans for these missions. And then, of course, we get introduced. I mean, again, you would have met these characters in The Fall of Reach if you read that first, but we have Linda, we have Kelly, and we have Kurt, who are basically John's team. What's cool is in the beginning of this book, we get to see this epic mission that the Spartans go on. And we learn, because in Contact Harvest, we learned what all these aliens from the video games, what their real names were. It's like the Grunts from Halo. Their alien real name is Ungoy. Or the Elites are the Sanghili. Or this and that. We learn about these cultures. We learn about what they actually are and that stuff. But what we learn in this book, which is kind of cool, is that all the names that we know of from the video games were created by the Spartans. So, like John came up with Elite or Brute or Grunt, or Jackals. They came up with these terms, which gives an in-universe reason for why they're called that in the games, which is cool. And of course, we get Avery Johnson back in here, and he's sort of a mentor figure to John and the Spartans in this book, which is rather cool. It's the first interaction he gets to have with these characters, and it's really cool to kind of see that friendship build here, because again, you don't really see that in the novels because Johnson isn't into many of them. So, but here we get to actually see that, and it's nice. We also know Animal Cole's ex-wife is a insurrectionist, and that'll be important later. Also, a revelation here. I mean, I think this was mentioned elsewhere, but I forgot. Avery was part of the Orion Project. This is another reason why he's chosen to kind of be mentors to the Spartans for this mission. One, because he's had the most interactions with the Covenant so far and succeeded in beating them. So, who better to train the Spartans um, to deal with that threat than him? I mean, they've been dealing with it, but he's got personal experience. But then also, he was part of the Orion Project. Now, if you notice, John, all of his Spartans are Spartan 2s. What happened to 1? Well, 1, there was never a Spartan 1 because they weren't successful completely. Um, Avery was a part of the original Orion Project, which was volunteering, and but it was kind of classified. So Avery is still basically a normal person, but he is, I believe, a bit stronger than the average human, and not extremely like Master Chief is, but he's a bit better at everything. You know, it's kind of like that midway stage. But since it wasn't a full success, it was considered a failure. But it was called the Orion Project. So for all intents and purposes, even though Avery Johnson is never called that, he's a Spartan 1, which is a pretty cool revelation. Also, so a really stupid thing, the insurrectionists, because the insurrectionists are still around, which is another cool element about this book, which is, you know, insurrectionists think, well, maybe if we give the Covenant some locations of UNSC bases, we can kill two birds with one stone. We can get rid of the UNSC, who we hate and is our mortal enemy, and maybe we can make alliance with these aliens and have peace. You know, these aliens clearly don't want peace, and also, when you have aliens that say that we want to kill you all, it's time to put your political differences aside and work together to defeat the bigger threat, and then have your squabbles after the fact. But they decided to do this, which of course kicks in the butt later. There are rumors of Spartan ages, or at least we think are rumors, that causes some tension for John. But there's this guy named Nethro, and he's, you know, trying to be buddy buddy with the Spartans. He's always given them the benefit of the doubt. He claims to John that he's heard from a buddy who worked on Reach one time that he got beat by a bunch of 8-year-olds, but that should have been classified information. So we also get Nizat, this elite dude, and I looked him up, and he's a character that reappears in Oblivion, which is the next novel, and he also appears in Halo Outcasts, which happens later. So that's cool. Crather also subverts expectations. Ooh, look at me using that in a positive light instead of a negative light, like in the Star Wars sequels. But Crather is meant to starts off as this huge like bully. You know, like once he learns that John's like a child, like 15, and all the Spartans are, he doesn't have trust in them. He's painted to be the bad guy. But I remember the guy I mentioned earlier, Nithro, or however the fudge you say his name. He's the problem. He's an insurrectionist sympathizer. He's a spy. And he's been trying to be friends with John this whole time, but he's actually the enemy. And Crother is actually, you know, he's understandably cautious. These are still children. Doesn't matter how advanced they are, how skilled they are, they still don't have the experience. But in time, they learn to grow with that. There's also a funny Halsey moment, which we might call a Denning moment for those Star Wars fans. I don't know. It's a very short scene, though, and it's played more for laughs than, like, uncomfortableness. But the entire ship is, like, bugged with stuff so that the bad guy can listen in that I've been talking about. And so she pretends to flirt with Crother so they can get a part of the ship that she's checked thoroughly has nothing in it. So she starts saying like, I want you, Crother. You know, I'm not getting any younger. Da, 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 da. And he kind of realizes something's going on, so he kind of starts playing along, and he's like, what would you ever see in an older man like me? And she replies, experience. It's a funny little scene. But then she makes it to the back of there, and she's like, I'm sorry for that, but I need you to get back here so I can talk to you privately. And she asks if he needs anything, and he says, I could use a cold water to calm down. you know, and it's just a funny little scene. But then they talk about the traitor and everything, and that all gets set up. Crother then, before the final mission of the book kind of happens, gives the rank of Master Chief to John, because without that, John won't have the respect or the trust of these other men besides the Spartans to get the job done. But they'll know that if he has the rank of Master Chief, which is 4 ranks above where he's at right now, which is Petty Officer, that they'll know that it comes from him, and that means his opinion is behind it as well. So they do that. But one of the big things about this book, which is again a nice little, because what do you do with Master Chief? How do you evolve his character before the games? Well, he's 15 here, so, and he already lost a friend previously, Samuel, as we mentioned, and it's not that he doesn't put his men on missions and stuff, but he tries really hard to. Anytime there's like a situation where it might be certain death, if it happens, he tries to put himself in there instead of his crew, because he'd rather he die than his crew. But when you're a person of leadership, you must be willing sometimes to allow someone you care about to pass away. You can't be the hero every time. It even mentions, like, Crother asks, like, well, what happens if you die? He's like, Fred takes over. Okay, well, Fred might be great, but a lot can happen on the battlefield in like 10 seconds. So while they're adjusting the fact that Fred's now in command of them, they could all perish, you know? So it became a thing of, and it's the same thing that everybody has to kind of deal with if they're a hero, right? Go back to the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Luke can't do everything by himself. He has to trust in his Jedi to do things, and that means putting them on missions where they could die. Same thing with like Batman, with Robin or Batgirl. He has to risk that. It's part of the risk of being a hero. But you can't do it all by yourself. You just can't. So it's part of that's kind of the growth he has in this book, is going from kind of putting all the most dangerous stuff on himself and allowing other people to go through it, because that's part of leadership. You have to order men in situations where they could die, and so that's part of his arc in this story. And it's actually pretty good. And Crother ends up sacrificing himself. He ends up dying along with some ODSTs. Um, the traitor ends up making it away, so we'll see him again in the future. And but they successfully defeat this little section of the Covenant, of course, not the whole Covenant. And then Nizat, the guy I mentioned earlier, the Sangheili elite, he gets away though. And yeah, overall, I liked it. It's not the best thing ever. I think I enjoyed it significantly more than Contact Harvest though. So there you go. There's another win. Troy Denning has 2 series in his belt, 2 different franchises, Star Wars, Halo, and he's rocking it. So I'm excited to read Oblivion again by memory. I remember that one being a bit weaker, but this one's pretty solid. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think you will too if you're a fan of Halo. So if you want something set before the games, check out this story. Till next time, guys. Uh, let's finish the fight. Bye bye.